Hey, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding at the School of Foreign Service here at Georgetown University, I'd like to welcome everyone to our book talk with Sherman Jackson on the Islamic Secular. Sherman Jackson is the King Faisal Chair of Islamic Thought and Culture and Professor of Religion and American Studies and Ethnicity at the University of Southern California. Before moving to Southern California, he had an illustrious career at the University of Michigan in the Department of Middle East Studies, where he established a scholarly reputation as a leading authority in the field of Islamic studies, Islamic law, and African American studies. He's the author of numerous books, including Islamic Law and the State, the Constitutional Jurisprudence of Shahabuddin al-Qaddafi, Islam and the Black American, Looking Toward the Third Resurrection, Islam and the Problem of Black Suffering, and then most recently, this book, which I have with me, The Islamic Secular. Now, on a personal note, roughly, I think 14 years ago, Sherman Jackson and I found ourselves in Vienna, Austria, at a conference on secularism that was organized by the great Charles Taylor. And I remember at the conference, there was a lot of big names, big intellectuals who were at the conference, including Sherman Jackson. I remember thinking to myself, I really wish Sherman Jackson had more time to contribute to the roundtable deliberations. Well, he's finally spoken on the topic of the secular, and the result is this massive volume just released by Oxford University Press. And the last time I checked, it's over 500 pages. So the format for this book talk is very simple. Professor Jackson will speak for I'm assuming 30 minutes or so.
No, it won't be that long.
A bit shorter. And then we'll have questions, answers, some commentary. We are being joined with from people online. So we're going to try and get to some of the interventions from people who are joining us via social media and Zoom. And then we will wrap it up, hopefully in a timely manner. So please join me in welcoming to Georgetown University, Professor Sherman Jackson.
Well, thank you very much, Nader. I do remember that time we spent together in Vienna. In fact, you should take a little more credit because you're the one who picked the restaurant that we went to.
That's true.
And it was a very good Iranian restaurant. First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity for me to come here and share in the intellectual capital in the room. When I was invited to come here, one of the mild, I won't call it stipulations, but sort of presumptions that I had, and what I hoped that would be the case was that I would be speaking to people who had actually read the book, because I didn't think that if I couldn't articulate my argument fully in 500 pages, I'm not likely going to be able to do that in a 30-minute presentation. And therefore, we might end up talking past each other because we're not sure of what we're talking about. But at the very least, what I figured I'd do today is to sort of lay the ideational context of the book, the frame of the book, what the book is trying to do. And then from there, we can entertain questions and comments, and we can expand on whatever aspects of the book you might want to expand on. But I'm not going to try in 30 or actually 15, 20 minutes to present an overview of the entire book. I think that would actually not really be possible. But anyway, let me try and bring you into the frame of mind that the book builds upon and seeks to explicate. Now, I've never been a fan of B.F. Skinner's notion that our thinking is entirely dictated by the words we have. I remember way back in college, we studied this, and Skinner was of the opinion that we can only think with the words that we have. And if we don't have certain words, we can't think certain thoughts. I've never been a fan of that position. I don't think that our thinking is entirely driven by the words or the language that we have. I know that yellow is brighter than green, and that's not driven by the words that I have. In fact, the description of what I experienced or what I apprehend there comes after the apprehension itself. And we could apply that even to things in the Quran. I mean, I'm thinking, for example, of certain verses in Surah Safat, where the Quran talks about that the cursed tree of Zaqqum that sits in the center of hell, and it says that its stems and stalks are as if they were the heads of Satans. Now, I've never seen a Satan, but I know that that's a horrible scene. I don't have the words with which to sort of describe why it's horrible or what's horrible about it, because I have really no reference point to describe it with. But I can know that without necessarily having to precise words to do that. Now, having said that, just because words don't drive all of our thinking doesn't mean that they drive none of our thinking. And here's where we come to one of the fundamental points that sort of incentivized my writing of this book. Because the fact of the matter is that the modern lexicon, and when I say the modern lexicon, I mean the lexicon through which we sort of engage in global discourse, which is heavily influenced, if not actually, you might even want to say dictated by the West and the Western experience. That lexicon has had a far-reaching impact on the way that Muslims think about the world, about themselves, about others in the world, about the possibilities in the world. The language through which we speak dictates lots of things. So if we think about, what is, for example, the meaning of religion? What is the meaning of faith? All these things, depending on how we understand them, have far-reaching implications for how we engage all these things in the world. And along with that would be the concept of the secular. And one of the quotes that I make in the book, I'm going to read right now, and it's one of those that sort of inspired much of my thinking in this particular book. It comes from the Arab philosopher Taha Abdul Rahman, and he says the following, quote, "The reality is that as long as Muslim society does not find its way to innovating new conceptual tools or reprocessing the conceptual tools of others to the point that they become as if they had been innovated originally by Muslims, there will be no hope of exiting the intellectual desert that has become the Muslim mind." In other words, what Taha Abdul Rahman, and by the way, I'm aware that his name is actually Abdul Rahman Taha, but he writes under the pen name of Taha Abdul Rahman, so that's why I use that. But part of the point that he's making is that Muslim thinking is driven by the vocabulary and the concepts that have become dominant in the world today. And they can't think outside the confines of that vocabulary and those concepts. And this leads to certain conclusions and certain ways of thinking and certain ways of assessing possibility that might not be in their interest. Not only that, it tends to impede their ability to engage their own tradition spontaneously rather than through the interpretive prism that has been set by somebody else. Now, one way of defining or describing the dividing line between modernity, which we routinely take to be a positive thing, given our embeddedness in the idea of progress, the modern is almost definitionally better than the pre-modern because the modern represents progress, and that's before progress. But one of the ways of defining that dividing line is secularism. The modern is secular. The pre-modern is pre-secular, as it were. All right, and this is, I think, very plainly captured in Charles Taylor's monumental book, A Secular Age. You talk about 500 pages, that's over 800 pages, talking about the transition from a sort of, religious worldview to a secular worldview, our secular age. Now, this view of the world comes along with a particular vocabulary through which that view of the world is sustained and perpetuated. And the word secular is one of the major tools by which that dichotomous view of the world between the religious and the non-religious, or the religious and the secular. The secular is one of the tools by which that view of the world is maintained. And this is very clearly, in my view, laid out by Shahab Ahmed in his latest book, What is Islam? The Importance of Being Islamic. There, Ahmed writes the following. He says, quote, "Is X religion and therefore Islam? Or is X secular and therefore not Islam?" End of quote. In other words, Islam is supposed to refer to that which is religious, and that which is not religious cannot be Islam. So you have a dichotomy between Islam on the one hand, all right, as that which is purely religious, whatever that means, all right, and then you have that which is not religious and therefore not Islam. Now, this picture won't be completed until we bring in the concept of Sharia and add that to the mix, particularly the notion, all right, which is ubiquitous both in the Western Academy and in Muslim communities themselves, all right? And that is the notion that Sharia and Islam are coterminous, that if we draw a circle representing Islam and we draw a circle representing Sharia, the circles are exactly the same size. They are coterminous, and that there is no distinction between Islam and Sharia. The scope of Islam is the scope of Sharia, and the scope of Sharia is the scope of Islam. On this understanding, Islam is no less and no more than the dictates of Sharia. Islam is no less and no more than the dictates of Sharia. And everything that is not a dictate of Sharia is secular, in the sense then of falling outside Islam and thus outside of religion. And that's part of the work that the construct of the secular, as commonly understood, does. And it imposes upon Muslims this same dichotomous way of thinking. Now, this notion of the secular being the antithesis of religion is ultimately the whole function of the category secular as it was developed in the West. The secular is and was designed to be the realm where religion simply stays out, and we remain free then to pursue our ideas and interests free from the constraints of religion. Of course, this is according to the dominant understanding of religion in the West. And for many Westerners, it is the key to the West's success. The ability to free ourselves from the dictates of religion, all right, is what has enabled us to produce cars and airplanes and cures to modern diseases and all of the other things, the creature comforts that we so enjoy as part of modernity. Of course, this has far-reaching implications for modern Muslims, because in most of their everyday or quotidian activities, they find themselves too pursuing their needs and interests precisely in that secular realm. We're going to doctors, we're going to work, we're going to make money, we're going flying planes, plugging in the plug to our electrical sockets at home, all of the things, or most of the things that sort of impose themselves upon us in our daily lives as needs and aspirations, fall within that realm of the secular, which is supposed to be unrelated to religion, where we are actually freed from religion. And of course, among the largest of these realms is the realm of the political, all right? And we can say as well the realm of the economic, all right? And I'm speaking here from the perspective of the dominant perception in the West. And that's what enables us, all right, according to that understanding, to be quote unquote so successful in our political arrangement, in our economic arrangements, in our scientific inquiries, all right? The fact that we have freed ourselves from religion and ended up in this non-religious realm, all right? Now, as long as this perception of reality is what we pursue life through, we're likely to see ourselves as more and more secular. And we're likely to see religion, in this case, Islam, as more and more irrelevant, right? Because it simply does not speak to those issues that we confront most immediately on a daily basis. And we can talk about a bit more about this in the question and answer. Okay, now on the other hand, as a corollary to this understanding of the dichotomy between the religious and the secular, all right? Many Muslims will not be able to recognize the value of Islam, all right, on an everyday basis, because so much of what they're dealing with is perceived of as being located in that secular realm where religion is not supposed to be relevant. And therefore, as that secular realm grows larger and larger, so too does the irrelevance of Islam grow larger and larger. And I have in the book a quote from an imam in Philadelphia, which I know very well, or I used to know very well, having grown up there. I was visiting Philadelphia, it must have been 25, 30 years ago. You'll pardon my memory having faded a little bit, but it was some time ago. And there was a major economic project going on in the city, spearheaded by a very famous music mogul who had converted to Islam and was investing money in the economic development of the city, particularly in of the urban Black community. And they had not only job training programs, but actually job training facilities, school, housing project. It was a really, really impressive undertaking. And so one of the imams, they were taking me around showing me this, and I said to him, so what do the Muslims think about this? This is amazing. What do the Muslims think about this? And his response to me was, ain't no deen in it. They did not see it as being religious. All right, it was a secular undertaking that was not really religious enough to command positive attention from them. And now, this is not a critique of that point of view, certainly not directly, but I raise it to raise awareness of what this dichotomous thinking between the secular and the religious can do in actual life on the ground. It can disincentivize Muslims, all right, from developing in certain areas, because to develop in those areas is to engage in secular activity that takes one away from religion, all right? And this is a major contributor of the construct of the secular as we presently or mostly engage it. Now, my thesis in the book, by contrast, is that, or it begins with the idea that Islam and Sharia are not coterminous. That Islam and Sharia are not coterminous. That the concrete substance of the ideas and actions that are needed to instantiate and sustain Islam on the ground as a lived practical reality is not limited to the dictates of Sharia. But let me just say that again, because it was a rather convoluted sentence. No? Okay. Islam and Sharia are not coterminous, all right? That the concrete substance of the ideas and the actions that are needed to instantiate, that is to establish and to sustain Islam on the ground as a lived reality, not all of those ideas, not all of those actions, not all of those disciplines, not all of those pursuits are dictated by Sharia. And therefore, Islam and Muslim communities may be in need of things that are not the dictates of Sharia, right? If you think about, and there's a sentence about this in the book, or section about this in the book, many of the things that were needed to sustain Islam, even in the pre-modern period, all right? So if we take the concept of madrasas, for example, where all this education in the Islamic hard sciences took place, all right? Where does Sharia dictate what a madrasa is, or that you have to have even a madrasa? If you establish a madrasa, what does it consist of? All right. What is its administrative arrangement? Okay. Who works there? What is their authority? What are the parameters of their duties? All right. None of this is dictated by Sharia. All right. And yet Muslims saw fit to establish these institutions because they were essential to the functioning of Islam on the ground. All right. And so this is part of what I mean, and I explain in the book when I say that Sharia and Islam are not coterminous, but that Sharia is in fact bounded in the sense, not in the sense that it does not have something to say to everything, but in the sense that even if Sharia says what is halal and what is haram for everything, all right, even that does not exhaust, all right, all the considerations we need to take into consideration, all right, as we move about making decisions on an everyday basis, all right? And part of the problem that I see, even now, is that when we expect Sharia, all right, to tell us everything, we end up blaming Sharia, all right, because the decisions that we make don't often work. And the mere fact that it is halal, all right, means that, well, it had to work because Sharia says we can do it. And if Sharia says we can do it, then we can assume that it will work, all right? But Sharia saying that X is halal is not saying that X will be the most efficient economic policy. Sharia is saying that I can bring my wife this gift for a birthday present, that's perfectly halal, will not say, well, that gift will therefore necessarily make her happy, all right? And so there are considerations beyond what Sharia can dictate, which is the hukm shar'i, all right? The status of an act before God, all right? There are considerations beyond that that are needed for the concrete instantiation of Islam on the ground, all right? And so this is what I have in mind when I speak of Sharia being bounded, all right? I am not trying to say, this is not an attempt to curtail the scope of Sharia, all right? To produce our own, i.e. Islamic, our own religious versus non-religious spheres, all right? I lay out in the book quite explicitly, there are no non-religious spheres in Islam. There are spheres wherein our course of action is not dictated by Sharia, all right? And yet, the watchful gaze of the God of Islam, on the basis of which we're all going to be judged, all right? That is ubiquitous, that is totalizing, that is all-encompassing. Nothing escapes that gaze. Although not everything that we are permitted to do, all right? Or even, well, everything that we are permitted to do is not dictated by Sharia. All right. And I'm sure we'll have more opportunity to fine tune that in the question and answer. Okay. All right. Now, I'm getting there. Beyond this, it's extremely important to note that the source of the idea that Sharia is bounded, that Sharia and Islam are not coterminous, all right? That is not my idea. That is an idea that I gained from an assiduous reading of the pre-modern Muslim jurists themselves, particularly the field of usul al-fiqh, or legal theory. In usul al-fiqh, in Islamic legal theory, we find that jurists draw an explicit distinction between what they refer to as shar'i, all right? And what they mean by that is that which is dictated by the sources of Sharia, by the Quran, by the Sunnah, by Qiyas, etc. All right, you have all these sources of Sharia. The Shar'i is that which is dictated by those sources. This they contrast with that which is not derivable from the sources of Sharia. All right, and so they have a distinction between what Sharia and its sources concretely dictates and what it does not. Again, all of that, and we'll come back to this again and again, coming within the circumference of the totalizing scope of the watchful gaze of the God of Islam. Now, what all of this says, when the jurist is talking about the difference between the Shar'i and the non-Shar'i, is that what Sharia can be rightfully called upon to tell us, all right, has self-imposed limits. And these limits are recognized by the jurists themselves. This is in their books, all right? And I lay it out quite explicitly in chapter 2 of the book. Now, let me give you a concrete example of this. That's what you were waiting for?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. An old friend of mine who died in the 7th century, Shihab al-Qarafi. At one point, he's engaging in a discussion among the jurists, and I'm trying to keep it short. He says that two actions can be of the same legal status, but have drastically different consequences. All right? In other words, he bases this on an argument. The jurists are discussing the issue of if an individual is given a choice, an equal choice between doing two things, doing X or Y, all right, then X or Y must be of the same legal status. Otherwise, he doesn't really have a choice. He's being encouraged to do one over the other. Is that clear so far? All right. All right. This is complicated, according to Qarafi, by a certain hadith which says that the angel Gabriel came to the Prophet, alayhi salam, and gave him an equal choice between drinking from a chalice of wine, all right, and a chalice of milk. All right. The Prophet, alayhi salam, chose the milk. All right. But here the problem is raised because Jibril told the Prophet that had you chosen the wine, your community would have gone astray. This would have been bad, very bad for your community. All right. And there the question arises of, well, how could these two choices be what? Equal. All right. If choosing one would have been so good for the community, and choosing the other would have been bad. All right? And here Qaddafi says the following, that these two choices were actually equal in their legal status, although thoroughly different consequences attached to the two choices. The legal status, however, all right, is simply the right to make the choice. All right? Figuring out the consequences is something that the legal status does not necessarily tell you of. Is that clear so far? And Qaddafi gives the following as an example. He says, a man has an equal choice to build this house or that, to marry this woman or that, to buy this pack animal or that. All of those choices may be what? Permissible, halal. And yet, this house may be more beneficial and this more detrimental. This woman more beneficial and this detrimental. This pack animal more beneficial and this detrimental. The mere fact that it is permissible, all right, does not change the fact that one may have consequences that are different from the other, all right? And we have to engage in a calculus beyond the mere fact that it is permissible in order to know what those consequences are, all right? And to try to enhance or augment positive consequences, all right? And limit negative consequences. So in that sense, and Qaddafi is very clear on this, Sharia does not tell us everything, all right? And oftentimes, again, as I said, just because it's halal, all right, I don't think about the consequences of that halal act. I do the halal act, it blows up in my face, and then I blame what? I blame Sharia, all right? I blame Sharia because I have not recognized, all right, the distinction between the status of an act and the consequences that may come of it, and how Sharia is going to tell me the status of an act. You can do that, all right? Okay? I build the wrong house, I choose the wrong career. God is not necessarily going to punish me for that, all right? But that fact alone is not going to make that a nice job. It's not going to make that a career that I enjoy, all right? All right. Now, here, in my view, we come to a very critical inflection point. We must remember, if we're going to understand this book, that my argument is that while the scope of Sharia, in the way that I just described it, all right? In the way that I just described it, while the scope of Sharia is bounded or limited, the scope of the divine gaze, that God's watching us and taking account of everything that we do, that is unlimited and it is totalizing. On this understanding, even if Sharia does not dictate the course of action for every Muslim in terms of what they do, all right? Every action still falls under the watchful gaze of the God of Islam, all right? And therefore, there are no secular actions in the sense of being non-religious falling outside the gaze of what we have to understand ourselves to be accountable before God for, all right, in Islam. There are no such actions, all right? And so, yeah, and so, one second, I lost my place here. Yeah, that's right. All right, and so the idea that because Sharia does not dictate everything, all right, then everything cannot be religious, all right? My thesis contradicts that idea. We can have actions that are not dictated by Sharia, such as who I marry, what job I choose. That's not dictated by Sharia, all right? But it remains within the scope of that for which I have to consider myself accountable before God. And in that sense, it remains religious, all right? And so what we have here then is the possibility of a religious secular. And let me try and explain that real quick, and then we can close. There's a long-standing tradition in the Western Academy that recognizes the secular as that which is simply not a product of divine dictates. That is to say, the secular is that which God does not dictate to us. This is what they refer to as differentiation. That is to say that certain aspects of life are differentiated in that they are not dictated by Scripture. All right? Those aspects are what are considered to be secular. And this was the whole point of the secular, to differentiate certain spheres, all right? Politics, science, the economy, from the dictates of religion, all right? But by differentiating those things from religion, it does not mean that religion, period, has no authority in society. It simply means that religion does not dictate the substance of these areas. Again, primarily politics, the economy, science. All right? All right. And so the secular can be defined as that which falls outside the dictates of religion. All right? If we take Sharia to be the dictates of Islam, all right? And we go back to what the jurists say about the distinction between the Shari'i and the non-Shari'i, all right? Then there is a recognition of certain things falling outside the dictates of Sharia. Certain things in that regard being differentiated from Sharia, all right? And yet, as we said before, all right, the divine gaze of the God of Islam is ubiquitous and totalizing. Even if a thing falls outside the dictates of Sharia, it does not fall outside the dictates of what God will judge. All right? And in this regard, we have something that is at the same time what? Secular, but also what? Also religious. The Islamic secular is a religious secular. All right? And this is hugely what differentiates it from the modern Western secular. The whole point of the Western secular, all right, is to keep religion out. All right? To provide spheres in which religion stays out, religion is irrelevant. That is not what the Islamic secular is. All right? And in this way, Muslims who are involved in activities such as, I don't know, architecture, such as wealth production. Let's just take wealth production as an example, all right? I think if you look at the state of the Muslim world today, it's not very difficult to arrive at the conclusion that one of the major problems that Muslim communities have is their abject economic dependence on greater powers in the world. Economic dependence. There's a wage that is paid for that dependency, all right? And those Muslims who can contribute to the enterprise of wealth development among Muslims, all right, are conferring a hugely important source among or upon those Muslims. How to develop that wealth is not dictated by Sharia, all right? And in that regard, it is what kind of a pursuit? a secular pursuit, as I've been describing it. And yet it would be clearly for the purpose of enhancing the status, all right, and the functional operation of Islam in the world. In that regard, it is religious. And not only that, all right, religious activity can be seen as activity that is, for example, committed to wealth creation and not just fasting and praying and going on Umrah. The scope of religious activity, and therefore of those who are religiously valuable, expands exponentially. And we avert that notion that was expressed by the Imam in Philadelphia, where he says, what? Ain't no deen in it. All right? This is hugely important for the Muslim community, all right? Because otherwise, all of those people who are engaged in wealth creation, culture creation, developing weapon systems, or what have you, all of those people are seen as, and perhaps see themselves as, being what? Secular in the Western sense, all right? What the Islamic secular is arguing is that in the Islamic sense, all right, this is an Islamic secular and therefore religious activity, all right? And that is what we're trying to do there. Anyway, the Islamic secular, again, is a religious secular. It is not a non-religious secular. It derives not from the discourse of the West, but it derives from the discourse of classical Muslim jurists in the quintessentially Islamic enterprise of legal theory or usul fiqh. I'll stop here, and hopefully we can clarify more and more, at least to your satisfaction, through the question and answer period. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sherman. So much to discuss here. Let me just pose a few questions. When you cited the example of the Philadelphia Imam involved in that sort of economic reconstruction project, and he said that most Muslims, when they're asked, they say—
Not most, many.
Some of them, yeah, say there's ain't no deen in this. I'm not interested. Is this not a problem of really contemporary Muslims in this period of time, or American Muslims? The point being that
I don't think it's American Muslims. I don't think that's by far limited to American Muslims.
Okay, so I would argue that, let's say, I mean, you cite in the beginning of your book, for example, a fascinating example of the great Ottoman Sinan, the great architect who built these wonderful things. You also cite in the same sentence the case of Timur and his observatory that he built in Samarkand. There's many examples that one can cite. Let's say Ibn Khaldun's great work, you know, the Muqaddimah. When they were doing these great things, I think they were doing it out of a deep religious sort of vocation. The idea of them saying that me building as a great architect, you know, some construction, there ain't no deen in that, would be something that would just be alien. They wouldn't get it. So when we talk about reconnecting to one's sort of authentic tradition, there seems to be a problem with contemporary Muslims today who are saying things about what it means to be a Muslim, and this dichotomy between, you know, the religious and the secular that didn't exist in the pre-modern era among Muslims.
Yes.
So then the question becomes, how do we overcome that? Or how do you push back against that? How do you get Muslims to sort of, you know, overcome this artificial chasm where they see something that they think is un-Islamic, when in many ways it's in many ways very Islamic? How do you sort of advance that type of argument among the community of Muslims today?
Well, you write a 500-page book. I mean, that's the beginning. And let me just say, in response to, because I saw you react slightly. I wasn't saying that there's no difference between modern Muslims and pre-modern Muslims on this issue. I was saying that there's no distinction between American Muslims and, say, Muslims in the Muslim world on this issue.
Okay.
I mean, on this side of modernity, we're all, I think, equally afflicted by this infisam shakhsiyya that divides us into secular and religious modes of being. I think, quite frankly, I mean, you see, the problem is that one of the reasons I think that we imbibe this notion of the division between the secular and the religious is that we have been convinced of the narrative that says that that was the key to the West's success. Mm-hmm. That you have to separate religion out of various and sundry aspects of life in order to be able to progress. Mm-hmm. And of course, Muslims want to, quote unquote, progress. And therefore, the temptation to want to sequester religion more and more, and therefore open up spaces where, you know, we can, quote unquote, freely indulge. Mm-hmm. I think that's still there. Mm-hmm. But I think that going back to our own Islamic tradition and pointing out, as you just suggested, that wait a minute, you have all kinds, and not just these people. I mean, people in the, you know, in the sciences, you know, mm-hmm. Ibn Nafis and all these people, even Ibn Sina in medicine. Right. Ibn Sina did not see himself as a non-religious non-religious person. And so you have all of this activity, which is very highly developed, which is also non-Shari'i, all right, but is thoroughly integrated into what it means to be a Muslim in the pre-modern world. I think that if we can re-access the idea that the secular and the religious are not dichotomous, mm-hmm. all right, but there are aspects of religion that are dictated by Sharia, and there are other aspects of religion that are not dictated by Sharia, but may be equally important, equally critical to the instantiation of Islam on the ground, as we saw there. I mean, all we have to do is ask this, and I know this is a somewhat sensitive issue to raise because we have a modern narrative that I think that really infantilizes us as humans. But in the pre-modern world, we lived in an overall state of war. All right. By that I mean, war was the norm. You didn't need an excuse or justification for going to war. All right. Today you need an excuse. All right. So to survive in the pre-modern world, you had to be willing to wage war. Where did the weapons come from? Where did the military training come from? Where did the military discipline come from? Where did the map making come from? All of these issues are what we might call what? Secular, in the sense of not being dictated by Sharia. All right? And yet Islam on the ground would not have succeeded without these activities. All right? All right? And so in the same way that we need the Shari, we need the non-Shari or the second, and it's a combination of these, all right, that really constitutes Islam. I think getting back to the understanding that this is not secular activity in the sense of being non-religious or separated from religion. If we can overcome that, but this, there's a lot of heavy lifting there because we've already, I think, thoroughly imbued the idea that certain activities are religious and everything outside that is non-religious. I think that's more of an anthropological question, and I don't have any answers in that regard. But I think those are some of the, obstacles that we have to surmount.
Okay, very good. Let's open the floor to some questions and comments from the floor, and then we'll also take some questions from Zoom. I have more questions I'll ask you, but I want to give this audience a chance because they've been waiting very patiently. Yes, right there. Go ahead. Stand up, please. Yeah, we can hear you better.
Hi, it's really nice to meet you. I'm from Kentucky. I'm a freshman in the School of Service, and thank you for being here today. I was really interested in when you mentioned your thoughts on Skinner's ideas on language and how that has limited some of our understanding of being able to interpret Islam. I was wondering if you felt that way, particularly in English or in Arabic as well.
I don't think that I think that in Arabic. That's a good question. And the honest answer to that question, I was thinking more in English. I'd have to give it a little more thought in Arabic. I don't think so in Arabic. But that's not a question I really thought about. So I would suspend that answer for now. But in English, definitely. I mean, as I said, what does it mean to do something religious? We have an understanding of that actually does not really come from the Islamic tradition itself, all right? And yet, the standard of religiosity that comes from the word religion, all right, which comes from the West, all right, has a lot and far-reaching impact on how we think about ourselves as we go through our daily lives in terms of whether we are acting religiously or not. And so language does have an impact on our not only on our thinking, but on how we the mode of being that we adopt in the world.
Question, yeah, go ahead.
My name is Hadi. I'm on the second year PhD program in religious pluralism here. And thank you for your presentation, really fascinating. Prompt me to read your book soon, inshallah. I heard you to say to as Muslims to participate in a world with an extended horizon, to engage this world. But I was just wondering, what if, since the Western secular understanding is dominating, what do we do if we are explicitly asked to keep our religious identity, even an extensive religious identity outside of our roles in society?
Well, if I understand your question correctly, look, sustaining a religious identity is essentially a cultural enterprise. No? All right? And that means that we're going to have to engage in culture production, all right, in ways that resonate, that both reflect and reinforce. Reflect on the one hand and reinforce on the other hand, all right, our religious values, our sense of being Muslims, in our skins, in our bodies, as we move about in society, all right? That work is going to be largely what?
Secular.
Islamic secular, right? It's not going to be dictated by Sharia, all right? And so issues such as fashion design in that context become absolutely critical on the one hand, all right? And Islamic secular on the other. We live in a culture. The culture that we have didn't just plop out of the sky, all right? This is the result of cultural creators, cultural actors contributing, okay, to the cultural landscape in which we live. And if Muslims are going to find themselves in a position where their religious values, all right, are seen by themselves and by others, okay, as being welcome features of a cultural landscape, then we will have to make our contributions culturally to that landscape. It's as, I think Richard Rorty quotes this, he says, anybody who wants to live a life of principle without constant adjustment will have to create the tastes by which they are judged. All right? And quite frankly, I don't want to open up a can of worms here, but I think it's apropos. This is what I think the LGBTQ community has been very successful at doing over the last 40 years. Culturally. Right? And Muslims will have to engage in some of the same activity. And that activity, all right, will be more Islamic secular, all right, than it will be Sharia.
Yeah, a question online. Which modern Islamic scholars acknowledge how Islam and Sharia are not completely identical? Is this the ideological distinction between the Muslim Brotherhood on the one hand and Salafists or Wahhabis on the other?
I'm not sure I would draw any kind of straight line, dividing line between any of those movements. And quite frankly, I think that I'd be more comfortable in taking any particular thinker and looking at what they say. Right. All these groups say a lot of things, and they can be interpreted in this way in one context and that way in another context. I'm not comfortable drawing a straight line. Right. I think that Salafis would tend to be more what I refer to in the book as Sharia maximalist. Mm-hmm. And that is that they want everything to be dictated by Sharia, all right? Not because, in my view, they're quote unquote extremists, all right? But because they're very suspicious of other sources of the production of ideas overrunning the Sharia, All right, they're very suspicious of that, and they're very, I think, rightly concerned about that. So they would want to maximize the Sharia dimension, and render us far less dependent on the non-Shari than we are on the Shari. All right, as a means of protecting the Shari. All right, and let's face it. I mean, Salafism is a modern phenomenon. All right, it is a product of the modern world. All right, and it is in part a reaction to the sense of being threatened, all right, by forces that would put distance between Muslims and Sharia, all right? And so they want to expand the scope of Sharia in order to protect it. I think they would be more inclined toward that than perhaps say the Muslim Brotherhood, all right? But again, I'm there's overlap. You know, I'm not comfortable with a straight line.
Dividing. Question here at the front, and then at the front row, and then we'll take two questions at the back. Susan, I see your hand at the very back. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Professor. Like a nice book. It's
sorry.
Actually, it's very good. Yeah, it's heavy too. One quick question is, you mentioned this a little bit, the distinction between the Islamic secular and Sharia. What is the exact relationship between the two? You mentioned something about the cultural context in which maybe Sharia functions, but can you speak a little bit more about the exact relationship between the two? And while thinking about that, you might also address the question of how non-Muslims might benefit from this redefinition of the secular, because the way you framed it at the beginning, it seems like a Muslim problem. But what about non-Muslims? How might you convince them of the benefits of this reconceptualization of the secular?
Well, let me try to take your last question first, and then we can double back, and because I would probably need a little more clarification on your first question. Look, I'm not in the business of telling non-Muslims how they can benefit from the Islamic secular in terms of their own religious commitment. I will say this, however, I think that what it potentially I'm sorry. What it potentially contributes to the public discourse, particularly in a place like America, for example, is that it can convey to non-Muslims, all right, that we as Muslims, all right, are able to debate with you immigration policy, healthcare policy, gun control policy, all right, on the basis of the same kinds of considerations that you would see germane to these issues, all right, because these issues are not Shari'i issues. Immigration policy is not a Shari'i dictate, all right? Healthcare policy is not a Shari'i dictate, all right? Gun control, either it's halal or haram. Once it's halal, what regulations are going to go along with that? Also Islamic secular. And so the idea that because we are religious, dedicated Muslims who are not willing to abandon Sharia, and I think that is a point that Muslims need to be a bit more forthcoming in making. We are not willing to abandon Sharia, but that does not mean that we are closed off from all non-Sharia considerations, all right? That the moment you bring up healthcare, we're going to run to Sharia and try to dictate something to society. The moment you bring up immigration policy, we're going to run to Sharia and try to dictate something to society. And you cannot argue with us, you cannot debate with us, because these are religious dictates that are beyond compromise and beyond negotiation. So I think that what the Islamic secular can contribute to public discourse is the fact that there are numerous aspects of our public order, all right, that we can debate with you on the basis of the same kinds of logic and considerations that you would normally bring to that enterprise. All right. Of course, this is going to be, for us, fall back, on a backdrop of religiosity. All right. But the concrete reasons that are given or not given, all right, there's lots of exchange that can go on there. Because I think the stereotype is, and there are others, there's some out there who actively promote this stereotype, all right, that Muslims as religious people, all right, they can't argue on the basis of anything but explicit dictates from the Quran, all right? And I think that stereotype, or the implosion of that stereotype, could add much to our public discourse in America.
Go ahead.
There was not, anyway.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a question about like what we're calling the bounded nature of the Sharia. To me, it kind of assumes that the Sharia is like a static enterprise, whereas I see it as being more dynamic. What I mean by that is, like I see Qarafi and others as saying, okay, Sharia requires secular energies. So
What kind of secular energies?
Meaning-
Islamic secular or
yeah,
secular?
Islamic secular energies, meaning that like, okay, we the Sharia will tell you face the Qibla to Mecca, won't tell you how to get there, right? But the Sharia doesn't stop there in that once you know the direction to Mecca, now the Sharia has a very direct, concrete ruling on that, on which way you pray, right? Or similarly, when it comes to the rulings of marriage, divorce, there's the static Sharia ruling, but in your circumstance, once you know, once you've weighed the pros and cons, there is a kind of a concrete ruling for you. And so the mubah almost seems like a theoretical construct where things can be mubah, and it's contingent on you not knowing where the benefit lies, etc. And so it seems to me that the Sharia then is not necessarily completely bound. It seems like a dynamic entity that expands as more information is sort of acquired. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Let me just say this, and I realize this is a difficult point for lots of Muslims because it sounds like what you're trying to do is shrink Sharia, all right, to some preconceived dimension, all right, that it should not go beyond. That's not what I'm trying to do at all. All right, and of course I agree with you. Sharia is an elastic construct. Okay, I think that where you may be rescued a bit from your angst on this issue is that no matter how expansive Sharia is as a discourse, all right, there is a limit where the question is no longer one of the hukm shar'i. In other words, even if I determine this house, probably my wife ain't gonna like it, and my kids are not gonna like it. People looking over there because my wife is here. Does that change his hukm shar'i?
Wouldn't it be like more? Wouldn't it be mandub to do one versus the other, or makruh to do one versus
Shar'an?
Wouldn't it? If you knew that one would cause more harm to people.
Well, what kind of harm? That's what I'm saying. Just she don't like it?
Well, let's say please.
No. I mean, we can get into minutia, but you see the point that I'm trying to make in that we reach a point where the hukm shar'i remains the hukm shar'i. It is mubah. All right? I can wear brown shoes or black shoes, can I not? Right? If my wife says, no, you should wear brown shoes. No, I like the black ones. What's the hukm on that?
If you were the one she liked, would it be mandub?
Be what?
Would it be mandub?
Why?
In that particular
What about the ones I like? That's the whole point of the hukm shar'i. You can do this or you can do that. All right. Now we will work this out among ourselves here. All right. And I probably will wear what she wants. No. I'm not. That's fine. Do you follow what I'm saying? But the hukm shar'i says you can wear these or you can wear those. I won't punish you for either. All right. So there are considerations beyond the hukm shar'i. All right. If we have speed limits, and we have to have speed limits, we could say 55, 60, 65. All right. All based on our assessment of what would serve the community. But even as a community, we're not likely to agree on that. All right. And therefore, those who have authority say it's going to be 55 or it's going to be 60. All right. I have an opinion that I think it should be 70. Okay. All right. All of those are mubah. All right. And choosing one over the other, the hukm shar'i does not change. 65 is mubah. 55 is mubah. 60 is mubah. All right. Yes, that's all going to fall back on the consideration of what you're saying of masalih, but we're not even going to agree on that. All right. And in this regard, the Islamic secular saves us some grief. All right. Because the moment I try to push all of these speed limits back into some dictate of Sharia, all right, then we're going to settle on one that's going to be halal and everything else is haram. All right. And that's how we get into these really toxic discussions that we can't get out. All right. Because I think that in advocating 65, all right, you're not a good Muslim. Am I advocating 60? I am. All right. Because we're arguing over what God said, but we're not. We're arguing over our assessment of what would serve the communal interest. And that is Islamic secular, not secular. I hope that point remains clear. So I agree with you. It's constantly expanding. All I'm saying is that there's a point at which we're no longer talking about the hukm shari. We're talking about how to instantiate a particular value. Okay? Is that? You don't have to agree to it, but do you understand what I'm trying to say? All right.
So here's a related question from one of our online viewers. At the end of the day, shouldn't the secular be required to work under the basic principles of Sharia?
Why is that even a question? If the divine gaze, all right, is totalizing, all right, God knows everything that I'm doing, and I'm going to be held accountable for everything that I'm doing. All right. So even in developing the speed limit, I'm still under the divine gaze, and I want to do what is pleasing to God. But God is saying, I have not dictated any specific speed limit. I have not dictated one. All right. So in my attempting to arrive at one, of course, I'm operating under the divine gaze of the God of Islam. And this is what makes this a religious secular and not just a secular.
Yeah, Susan Douglas, you're next, then at the back, and then
let me just say, just 1 second, Susan, if I could. I think that the problem we have, and I understand it, and you see, if I could make clear that I am not the one who are quote unquote imposing limits on the Shari'i, it's the jurists, not me. People think that this is an attempt to respond to modernity, to appease modernity. Oh, you say religion should be shrunk? Okay, I'm going to shrink it. That's not what I'm saying. This comes from the Muslim jurists themselves. All right? Not every decision you make, all right, can be attributed to Sharia. You married her because you thought she was fine, period. And that's a halal reason, but it didn't work out. That's not Sharia's fault. All right? And what Al-Qaddafi is saying, that's what he's saying. Good consequences or not so good consequences can attach to a halal act. You have to make calculus to determine which is which. All right? And that's what the jurists have been saying for centuries. This is not my innovation. We, in responding to the modern world, all right, because all of their ideologies that come out of like 19th century Europe, whether you're talking about communism or socialism or even liberalism, they're all universalizing ideologies, all right? And we simply took Sharia and universalized it, all right, as the response to these universalizing ideologies coming from elsewhere, all right? I'm saying I have nothing to do with that. I'm going back to what the jurists themselves are saying, pre-modernity, and that's where I'm coming from. And I think that, you know, I'm often going to be misjudged because people are starting with the idea of a totalizing Sharia, not even as the jurists meant it. Of course, the jurists will say that Sharia has a hukam for everything, but the hukam's not everything. Is that making sense?
It does, yeah.
All right.
Susan?
Yeah, I just wanted to make the observation. You began by talking about the definitions of words and the problem of religion often being interchangeable in the West with the church, meaning organized religion. You're speaking about jurists. They were speaking about popes and churches and priests and who took positions on things that even they didn't have a position before when Galileo came along. Well, I don't know if they had a position on gravity or, you know, saying things of that nature or heliocentric, but they had to seek out that, carve out that freedom of action space from the church, and often at great risk and peril of being burned at the stake or whatever else it was. So I guess what I want to frame is a question around, having perhaps not fully understood as Muslims, the value of the fact that we do not have chosen not to institutionalize a religious hierarchy.
Mhm.
And yet we sometimes act like there is one.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think that's part of it. I mean, in the book, I quote no less than Ibn Taymiyyah, and who's been accused of a lot of things, but being soft on religion ain't one of them, by a long shot. All right, and he says, who could excommunicate somebody, all right, for wrong ideas, all right, on mathematics, all right, or geometry, or something like that? Who could excommunicate somebody for that? These are not issues that are dictated by the sources of religion, all right? Now, we may have to judge some of those ideas, you follow what I'm saying, based on the sources of religion. So if those ideas say, well, the world has no creator, no, we go against that. That's a dictate of Sharia, all right? Okay, but what is biology? Or what is astronomy? Okay, it's not dictated by Sharia as a science. And part of what he's saying is that on that basis, who can excommunicate somebody for having wrong ideas in mathematics, having wrong ideas on geometry or something like that? All right. And so, yes, they are much more comfortable with recognizing, and I can quote others, all right, that there are issues that are not a dictate of Sharia. For example, Malik was of the opinion that, making certain predictions and predicting earthquakes and all these kinds of things, this may be going a little too close to, claiming ilm of the ghaib, all right? Qarafi comes out along with al-Baji, and this is in the Maliki school, and says, no, well, that may have been at that time. Now, these kinds of predictions are mediated through mathematics, all right? They're based on all kinds of mathematical calculations, all right? For that reason, they are not based on any kind of guessing what is the ghaib, okay? They're no different from predicting the fall of rain by looking at rain clouds, all right? And so, and this goes back to your point, this is an expansive, elastic discourse. Yes, it's going to be constantly expanding. I have no problem with that, and that in no way threatens the thesis of the Islamic secular, all right? At some point, however, the hukm shar'i is only going to tell you the hukm. And there may be all kinds of things we need to know beyond the hukm, which the sources of Sharia are not going to tell us. And if we as a community don't acclimate ourselves, not only to making those choices, but having healthy discourses and debates on what those choices should be, without this excommunication always creeping in and shutting down the discourse, all right, we're going to be in a lot of trouble.
We have, I think, 3 more questions. One at the back, 2, and then 3, and then 4. And then we'll have to end it there. There's one online I want to get to too, so go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Jackson. I really like the presentation. I also like how you tied it back to Allah Rahman, because I mean, what you are presenting is a conceptual tool to reconcile secularism with.
No. I have no interest in secularism. And the Islamic secular is not a commitment to secularism. I am not trying to augment the Islamic secular at the expense of the Sharia. I am simply saying that no matter how expensive the Sharia gets, all right, and I have no interest in shrinking the scope of the Sharia. All I am saying is that at some point, the hukam is only a hukam. It is not the benefit that I'm going to derive from buying this pack animal as opposed to that one. Is that making? Okay. No, I'm sorry if I was a little aggressive with you. No. But many people have said your book on secularism. No, it's
Yeah.
not a book on secularism.
So
It
your
is the opposite.
So your question is?
Yeah, so my intention is actually with the understanding of secularism and also with the problems that befall Muslims, because I think you were using kind of a blanket understanding of secularism. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Ahmad Zura, for example.
Mhm.
He also writes on secularism and differences between assertive secularist regimes and passive secularist regimes. And passive ones, the public visibility of religion is actually guaranteed. So a lot of Muslims can actually live, their lives in public. So the question and the debate is mostly about the exclusion of religion from the political. It's about the abandonment of the notion of religious legitimation of the rule, not necessarily about how you can see work as a vocational education. So my question pertains to that. How do you see the concept of the Islamic secular contributing to that debate? About whether Hakimiyya is a notion that is justified, about whether any ruler should be, or any system of rule should be religiously legitimated.
Well, again, the problem is not whether any rule should be religiously legitimated or not. Of course, for Muslims, all rules on some level should be religiously legitimated. All right. But what is religion? Is it Shari only? Or are there modes beyond the Shari? This is the problem as I see it. All right. And if we go back to pre-modern times, all right, and we don't really have time to get into this now, I'll just mention it. But if you take the category of siyasa, for example, as discretionary powers, all right, okay, they recognize rulers had discretionary powers of siyasa, all right, that were not purely dictates of Sharia. That's why you need discretionary powers. So the question is not whether they are justified religiously. I think that's the word you use now.
Legitimated, yeah.
Legitimated by religion, all right, is do we limit religion to the dictates of Sharia, or is religion even broader than that?
Yeah, the next question. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I guess I'm looking at Islamic secular terminology. What does it bring to my meaning, my understanding of the world and religion? So since from your logic, what I thought I followed is that it brings religion to our secularized lives. It's actually help us to bring the religion to the core of the center of the life. But maybe connecting to the public discourse discussion, how is it actually different from the people are living religion in their moral life, in their following their they are always following those how that term actually different than living this looking everything through a religion perspective in their own morality, but possibly it's gonna change this discourse, the public discourse, but I didn't see exactly the there.
Well, just based on what you said, I think one of the points that I want to make, I mean, you said that people are living their religious values, people are living their morality in their private lives, all right? Part of the problem that I have is that we've reduced religion to morality. And this is precisely why some of the brothers in Philadelphia would say, ain't no deen in it. This is economics. What's economics have to do with morality? What I'm arguing is that religion in Islam is broader than just morality.
Maybe I'm not even though it's not necessarily not deen, there's no deen in there. We look everything through what will be the prophet do in this circumstance, even though it's in economics, even though it's in politics.
Oh yeah, but that's religion, but there's no dictate there.
Yeah. That's the Islamic secular.
Right.
The woman.
Islamic secular, religious secular.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So this actually goes to my comment is to one is I appreciate what you brought forward, because one, in observing what has happened to our community in terms of this identity of the only way you can have edification is if you're an Islamic scholar, for example, you're widening the possibilities for something else that you could be, and that also be having an edification because it's contribution to the community, right? The second piece is around the calculus of adjusting in my adjacent field, right, of and looking at an Islamic psychology. So for example, when you gave the example of if I chose this house or that house or this wife or that wife. It also allows us to then explore the systemic influences of culture, of negative or positive self-view, and how that extends your choice to either stay in a bad, relationship or to get out of it based on those pieces, not the pieces that are directly related to necessarily is this halal or haram. And so you're opening up and also showing how we can have integration between the different occupations that we might explore. And so I really appreciate that.
That's a comment. You can comment on her comment, or
Do you know who that is?
I think they do.
Oh, well, then I have to comment.
Okay, yeah, I have to comment. Yeah.
No, I appreciate the comment, but I think one really important thing you said, and it is one of the hopes of this book. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ said, everyone will find easy that for which he or she was created. All right. I have economic genius. I have cultural genius. I have medical genius. All right. Okay. When it comes to religious sciences, that's just not my cup of tea. Yeah, I pray 5 times a day. I do my fasting, etc. But I'm not a religious scholar. Okay. All right. What contributions do I have to make? All right, to the reality of Islam as a lived reality on the ground. All right. And to what extent will my contributions be recognized as religious, as Islamic? What I'm saying with the Islamic secular, all right, that they can all be recognized as religious and Islamic. All right. And they don't have to be necessarily limited to the realm of the dictates of Sharia. We need wealth creation, for example. All right. Maybe I'll get into some of this more tonight, but people who have, financial genius, all right, who can contribute to the interests of the community, that should be recognized as religious activity. That should be recognized as Islamic activity. In the same way that Khalid ibn al-Walid's military genius was recognized as Islamic activity.
Riyadh?
Thanks very much for your talk. I just have a quick question about something you said regarding the function of the secular, the Western secular, I should say, and creating and maintaining and entrenching a dichotomous view of religion and the secular. I wonder whether you think your idea of the Islamic secular is sort of sufficient to removing us from that, right? Removing us from that dichotomy, especially when you articulate it precisely against this thing called the Western secular. And as I see it, and I may be wrong, it's hard to understand your thesis if not opposed to the idea of the Western secular. And so to the comment that was made earlier in the back about your book is about secularism, you reject that, and I totally understand where you're coming from on this. But in this sort of broader meta sense, it is about secularism. You're responding to pressures of the time. You're responding to issues of the time. You're writing in response to a sort of cultural moment that we inhabit, where to produce a book called The Islamic Secular becomes momentous, carries meaning, epistemic weight, and so on because of that fact.
Well, again, thank you. That's a very, very insightful comment. When I responded to the gentleman in the back, all I was saying is that this book is not a book, all right, about secularism in the sense of an advocacy of secularism, all right? Of course, you're right. The particular moment that we live in is defined by secularism, all right? And this book, and to a large extent, is a response to that moment. So yes, I agree in that regard. As to whether this will be enough to dislodge, quite frankly, I don't know, but I suspect that a lot of that will be dependent upon how much cultural energy Muslims are able to muster and bring to bear on the prevailing order that defines and circumscribes our lives. Because that's the medium through which these ideas and sensibilities will be communicated.
The last question in the room is to you, and then I have one online question. We'll end it.
It seems like that you consider fiqh and sharia having same meaning and scope. How do you differentiate between them? Why can we differentiate between sharia and fiqh and consider sharia as exact meaning of the deen? means religion.
Oh, well, I mean, there's a whole section in the book on the question of the distinction between fiqh and sharia. And I try not to be overly doctrinaire. I don't see a distinction between fiqh and sharia, all right? But there are others who do. I acknowledge that there are others who do, and that they have their reasons for holding that opinion. It's just not mine. So I mean, you can look at it like that, and that's fine. And I guess you'd come up with a different understanding of the Islamic secular if you recognize one at all. But I don't see this categorical distinction between fiqh and sharia. Fiqh and sharia are the same in my estimation.
Okay, last question, and it's a good question to end on from one of our online participants. Why do you think it's important to define a secular sphere within an Islamic scope? Hold on. Is it only because the Western thinking is imposing a dichotomy on Muslims and their thinking that allegedly causes backwardness in terms of Muslim community and the potential of development? Do you think having this sphere in Islam will encourage Muslims to create and build in different areas?
Well, I mean, obviously, I hope that will be the case. I mean, I would not have written this book if I thought that it would have the opposite effect. But I think that it's not. I mean, look, let's face it. In the modern world, whether we like it or not, the modern West is an interlocutor. But there's a difference between the modern West being an interlocutor on the one hand and the modern West being a dictator on the other. All right. So I accept the modern West as an interlocutor. The question becomes, are all of our meanings and understandings going to be dictated by that interlocutor? All right. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, it's it's not a matter of sort of, or not only a matter of sort of what, and I'm just going by what the question has said, what the West sort of quote unquote does to us directly. It is what these understandings produce in terms of our self-understanding, how Muslims feel within themselves on a deep psychological and emotional basis, all right, religiously diminished, all right, because they are not engaged in what is typically understood to be religious activity, all right? And I think that this is very damaging and harmful, both on the individual basis for those individuals and collectively for us, because what happens, we have all this talent in the field of wealth production, in the field of culture production, in the field of science. It's all siphoned off to, you know, quote unquote, secular in the Western sense, enterprises, because it has no outlet within Muslim communities, which recognize that, all right, as having an Islamic value. All right. And so we look at industry, we have all these Muslims, I mean, in the highest realms of industry, and many of them have very little to do with the community at all, because that kind of talent is simply not recognized as religious or Islamic talent. All right. So it has an effect both individually, personally, with all these people running around feeling that they're not religious and they pray 5 times a day. All right. And then it has a collective impact. All right, in that we don't get the benefit of all this talent.
Sherman, you can tell by the quality of the questions that we've only scratched the surface here. And it would be great if we could sort of envision a future event where people have read the book, or at least sections of it, and then we can have a much more deeper conversation on this important contribution that you've made to our understanding of the Islamic secular. So please join me in thanking Sherman Jackson.